Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris reporting to you on March 2nd, 2024 from Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus. I'm seated a few meters away from the Green Line, which separates the Turkish-occupied section of Nicosia and northern Cyprus from the Greek Cypriot area of Nicosia and southern Cyprus. The buildings you see behind me lie right on the Green Line, these abandoned buildings. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the division of Cyprus in the course of my presentation today. What I really wanted to focus upon, given the extraordinary and shocking events in the Middle East, was the relationship between the Cypriot government and the government of Israel, and the role that UK military bases situated here on the island of Cyprus are playing in the current genocide being perpetrated in occupied Palestine. So for many years after gaining independence from Britain in 1960, Cyprus outwardly backed the Palestinians in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it officially recognized Palestine as a de facto state. And indeed, about 30 years ago, Cypriot First Lady Androula Vassiliou, wife of then President George Vassiliou, was declared persona non grata in Israel when a delegation she was leading attempted to meet with Yasser Arafat, who was then under house arrest by Israeli authorities. Relations between Israel and Cyprus began to improve, however, in the 1990s. In the early 2000s, members of the Cypriot branch of the Greek Orthodox Church were accused of selling church-owned land in the West Bank to Israeli developers. In 2010, at a time when Cyprus and Greece were plunged into a financial and economic crisis, an exclusive economic zone was set up within the territorial waters between Israel and Cyprus at the maritime halfway point, which was a clarification that was essential for safeguarding Israel's rights to oil and underwater gas reservoirs in that area. Under the agreement between Israel and Cyprus, the two countries agreed to cooperate in the development of any cross-border resources discovered and to negotiate an agreement on dividing joint resources. Israel, Cyprus, the United States, and Greece then agreed to enhance cooperation in energy, cyber, and infrastructure security in 2019. Cypriot President Dimitris Christofias visited Israel in March 2011 for the first ever official visit by a Cypriot head of state. The following year, the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, visited Cyprus, the first visit of an Israeli Prime Minister to this island. Israeli energy firm Delek Group is now seeking to work with Cyprus on natural gas exploration and extraction near the Leviathan gas field off the Israeli coast. The large oil and gas field and the opportunities of joint use have brought the two countries close together. Noble Energy, a U.S. company, is also involved in the exploitation of the Leviathan gas field. That field, however, has caused friction between both countries, Israel and Cyprus on the one hand, and Turkey. Turkey has claimed that the Greek Cypriot government in the southern part of the island did not have the authority to sign these deals with Israel because the deals could be detrimental to the Turkish Cypriot population in the Turkish-occupied northern Cyprus, which, as I mentioned, lies just beyond that wall. Now, there are two British military bases on this island. The one I'm going to focus upon is called Akrotiri. It's near the southern coastal Greek Cypriot city of Limassol, and is one of two military sites retained by the British military under the 1960 treaty that saw the island gain independence from British colonial rule. These two bases together cover about 3% of the territory of Cyprus. When Cyprus gained independence from the UK in 1960, London struck a deal with Turkey, Greece, and Cypriot community leaders. The agreement outlined the Akrotiri and Dekelia, that's the other British military base, would both remain under British jurisdiction as sovereign territories, and they operate beyond the reach of Cypriot authorities. They're colonial outposts in what should be a fully sovereign Greek state under any of the principles that are routinely invoked by Western leaders in support of self-determination and national sovereignty. Akrotiri is about 40 minutes flying time from Tel Aviv. Britain's Ministry of Defense has released some information on Royal Air Force flights between Akrotiri and Israel, but refuses to specify what is being transported and will not disclose details of U.S. activity from Cyprus. British Defence Minister Grant Shapps recently told Parliament that the UK would provide, quote, only defensive materiel or material that might help with the recovery of hostages, close quote, during the conflict. It's hard to see how material that might help with the liberation of Israeli hostages held by Hamas would not at least partly be lethal in nature. In any event, Israeli newspaper Haaretz has reported a spike in the delivery of equipment and arms to Akrotiri and then on to Israel. Declassified UK, a news website focused on British foreign policy, revealed in November that RAF transport aircraft flew daily from Akrotiri to Tel Aviv between October 13th and 26th, around the time that Israel's genocide began in occupied Palestine. Over the 2 months prior to October 7th, declassified UK found no record of British military flights from Akrotiri to Israel. So the point here being there was an obvious and sudden spike in the transportation of military goods or the use of transport aircraft from Akrotiri to Israel after October 7th. The UK's Armed Forces Minister James Heapy said recently that Britain informs the Republic of Cyprus about flights to and from Akrotiri, quote, where appropriate, although there is no formal requirement to do so, closed quote. In other words, mind your own business. Locals have also become aware of the illegal presence of thousands of American soldiers now stationed in Akrotiri. Akrotiri has also been used to launch fighter jets attacking Yemen. So let's just contemplate again, as I've discussed in previous reports, what is going on there. The Yemenis are using whatever ability they have to stop the genocide in Gaza. And they've determined that the best way for them to do that is to impede maritime commercial traffic through the Red Sea to the port of Eilat. And they've been very clear about two things. They're only targeting the vessels of countries that either attack them or that are complicit in the genocide and heading to Eilat to deliver goods or taking goods out of Israel to other destinations. And the second thing they've been very clear about is that if the genocide stops, they will stop attacking commercial shipping. So rather than using its obvious ability, the United States government, to put a stop to the genocide by withholding military aid, without which Israel, as its own military leaders have acknowledged, could not conduct this so-called military operation, the United States government and its British vassal have decided to attack Yemen. And they're doing that from this island without the consent of the Cypriot people. Now, Akrotiri was also used for Western wars of aggression on Iraq and Syria, so this is hardly a new phenomenon in Cyprus. The use of the island, contrary to the consent of the Cypriot people, to wage wars of aggression on nearby countries in the Middle East. Local activists say that the UK and US effectively use Cyprus as a, quote, unsinkable warship, close quote. This, by the way, is terminology which US officials have used to describe the role that Israel plays for the United States. So apparently having one unsinkable warship in the region is not enough for the United States. Angry Cypriots have protested at Akrotiri against the alleged funneling of weapons to Israel for its genocidal war in Gaza. Since the latest escalation of the Israel-Palestine conflict on October 7th, locals have seen a daily increase in the number of flights from Akrotiri, according to one peace activist. In January, Haris Pashas, head of the Cyprus Peace Council, told Al Jazeera that, quote, Cyprus is neither a US, NATO, nor a British aggressive launching pad. We, the Cypriot people, do not want our country to be involved in any way in the bloody massacre taking place in the Gaza Strip, close quote. Athina Kariati, a member of another Cypriot peace organization, United for Palestine and Cyprus, told Euronews earlier this month that, quote, we don't want our island to be part of these wars. They are not for democracy, peace, or justice. We do know what invasion means. The memory is very fresh. The apartheid and settler genocide that is taking place in Gaza is very close to what we experienced in Cyprus. Kariati argues that the oil and gas dealings between Cyprus and Israel helped to shift official support in Cyprus towards Israel and have also led to a, quote, new militarization of the island. And she continued in her discussion with Euronews, quote, "The military presence on and around Cyprus is rising in number and power. It doesn't make us feel safe in any way," close quote, she told Euronews. And this should be obvious to any sensible person that if this island is being used in some manner to enable or facilitate a genocide across the Mediterranean in occupied Palestine, and if it's being used to pummel an impoverished country like Yemen, which is simply trying to put a stop to this genocide, it's easy to imagine that people who support the Palestinian cause, and particularly people from these parts of the world that are being so deeply oppressed by the US and its Israeli proxy and the United Kingdom, might see certain factions of them at some point lash out against the people of Cyprus in some manner because they perceive that this country is complicit in their own suffering. But again, this is all being done without the consent of the Cypriot people. Now, following a prolonged period of ethnic tensions, Turkey invaded northern Cyprus in 1974, leading to its division into the Greek Cypriot Republic of Cyprus in the south and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The conflict resulted in widespread death, violence, and displacement on both sides. I myself have an indirect personal connection to that unresolved injustice because one of my sisters, married a Cypriot gentleman who is from Northern Cyprus and who, as a young boy, was ethnically cleansed along with his family from that part of the country and was forced effectively by the Turkish invasion and occupation to resettle here in Nicosia. And although he could cross the Green Line and visit what was once his property and has been stolen from him and his family, he has refused to do that his entire life because the experience, frankly, is just too painful for him. And so it's something that within our own family, conflict and injustice that we feel quite personally. Now, before I conclude, this particular report, I want to comment on a somewhat related matter, since we're talking about the subject of Israel and Palestine, and that is the self-immolation of U.S. Air Force Airman Aaron Bushnell in front of the Israeli embassy in the United States. And there's been a lot of talk about this, and principally the message we're hearing from people who are sympathetic to Israel, who are supporters of Israel, and even a couple of people I've noticed who are, established supporters of the Palestinian cause, is that Aaron Bushnell was clearly, in their minds, mentally disturbed. Because how could anybody who's not mentally disturbed, in their view, take his or her own life in such a painful manner, whatever the cause may be? And I just want to offer a personal perspective on this. I have a different view. First of all, I'm not in any position to say whether Aaron Bushnell was quote-unquote mentally disturbed or not. I'm not even sure, frankly, what that means. I don't know whether it's a medical term, whether it's some kind of a pathology that's recognized by the psychiatric profession. But whatever it may mean, those of us, like me, who don't have psychiatric expertise and haven't had the opportunity to conduct a thorough examination of Aaron Bushnell, and the life that he led, and to speak with people who knew him personally and knew him well in the final months of his life, I'm in no position to conduct any kind of a psychiatric assessment of this young man. And I don't think that anybody else who, like me, lacks that kind of expertise and has not been able to conduct the necessary due diligence that a psychiatric expert would have to conduct to offer an informed opinion on his mental state, I don't think they're in any better position than me to say whether he's quote-unquote mentally disturbed. What I do know, and what I can say as a layperson, is that what he did was accompanied by written statements, an audio statement, and he sounded to me to be perfectly rational and perfectly aware of what he was doing and what the consequences would be and his reasons for doing it. And there have been reports that have come out that he had learned that U.S. troops were being used in some capacity on the ground in the fighting in Gaza, where there is an unequivocal genocide happening before the eyes of the world. Although one struggles to understand, and certainly I couldn't do such a thing, nor do I recommend that anybody even contemplate doing such a thing, obviously. I can understand why someone in his position would experience a severe crisis of conscience, assuming that he had a conscience, and I believe he clearly did. And the last thing I want to say about this is to talk about a hypothetical to sort of hopefully enable those of you who are listening to this report to reflect upon what we say about people who do similar things in drastically different circumstances. I'm going to ask you to contemplate this hypothetical. Imagine that an Israeli military commander and his advisors discovered that within Gaza, in a particular tunnel, there were a number of Israeli hostages being held, and that they analyzed the situation thoroughly and came to the conclusion that it was possible for them to liberate the hostages, but that in order for that to be done, they would have to send commandos in what was effectively a suicide mission. That it was highly likely that those commandos would be killed, and that there was a high risk that they would die in a gruesome and painful manner. And imagine that they also decided, based upon their analysis and the circumstances as they understood them, that those commandos, in order to execute the plan that had been devised, would inevitably have to kill some civilians, including likely Palestinian children. Imagine they then approached a unit of commandos, presented to them the situation, the plan, explained thoroughly to them the likelihood of death, the high likelihood of death, of a painful death, and instructed them, directed them, ordered them to undertake this mission, which was effectively a suicide mission. Imagine that they accepted the mission, as would be their duty under Israeli law, presumably, and that they, in fact, did liberate the hostages, did, in the process of doing so, cause the deaths of dozens of Palestinian civilians, including children, and did, in fact, have to lay down their lives in a gruesome manner. Imagine all of that, and this is not some kind of, completely fantastical hypothetical. We know that there have been situations, wartime, in the past where soldiers were called upon in extreme circumstances to conduct what were in effect, suicide missions where there was a high risk of a very painful, agonizing death for the purpose of achieving a larger military objective. That's happened in the past. It'll happen in the future. It is one of the tragic and horrible facts of war that this does sometimes occur. Now, I ask you to contemplate, in that scenario, who in our society would say that those men were mentally disturbed? They would have laid down their lives, knowingly laid down their lives in order to liberate hostages, knowingly taking the lives of innocent civilians for the purpose of liberating those hostages, knowingly exposed themselves to an agonizing death in order to achieve the military objective set for them by their commanders. I certainly don't think that those who support Israel would characterize those men as being mentally disturbed. How can we therefore assume that Aaron Bushnell, who laid down his life without taking any life for the purpose of drawing attention to the horrific, sadistic suffering being inflicted purposefully, intentionally by the state of Israel with Western support upon the Palestinian people, how can we assume that that man who took his own life was mentally disturbed, but these soldiers, in my hypothetical scenario, were not? At the end of the day, I think whatever the truth may be about Aaron Bushnell's mental state, he has done something extraordinary. He has done something which is the ultimate sacrifice, and we should honor his memory and do everything possible to ensure that he did not die in vain. This is Dimitri Lascaris reporting from Nicosia, Cyprus on March 2nd, 2024.